Okay, our next speaker is we have two speakers actually, Mindy Leffler and Kriszha Sheehy, who are coming to us from Emmes Endpoint Solutions, and they're going to be talking to us about another endpoint that you all have been testing out and really doing the work to see how this can function and be utilized in Angelman syndrome research, which is the home-based video capture to assess function in people living with Angelman syndrome. So we're very excited to hear all about what you've learned.
Thank you. Okay, so thanks very much for the opportunity to present. I'll start with just a brief disclosure slide and then get into it. As with many things, this starts with a personal story. So this is my son, Aiden, who has Duchenne muscular dystrophy just before his first clinical trial. I think he was 8 at the time. And in the more than a decade since that picture was taken, the Duchenne community has had over 40 studies that have failed to meet their primary endpoint. And most notably, and most recently, a gene therapy product that had accelerated approval that just failed to reach statistical significance on its primary outcome just last week. And many of these studies are accompanied by questions of whether it was the outcome measure or the compound itself that failed. And all of these studies are accompanied by groups of families who have not received the definitive answers that they deserved when signing up for a clinical trial. So when my son started his third clinical trial, I took it into my own hands to try and figure out whether something was happening. So I started taking video. And this is what he looked like just prior to starting the study. Super angry because he can't get into our minivan. That's embarrassing if you're in middle school. And this is about 4 months in. And this is about 7 months in. And so that's when, we thought video would be a really interesting, objective way to take a look at what's happening to these children as they participate in clinical trials. So we started working on the Duchenne video assessment. It's very simple the way that it works, but it's also very structured and standardized. So we give caregivers training materials, training videos, a training manual that guide the way that they take videos of their children doing everyday tasks in the home environment. The caregivers then record their own videos, and then we have quality monitors that look at the videos as they come in, make sure that they're going to be scoreable. And then we have central raters that we've trained and certified, and they are trained on validated scorecards that go ahead and score each video with those scorecards. So we've spent a lot of work over the last several years validating this approach in Duchenne. These are the publications that we've published, these manuscripts we've published since then, which leads me to beginning work in Angelman syndrome. So as we started talking to families affected by Angelman syndrome, we started hearing a lot of the same themes that affected our Duchenne community. And that was a lack of specific outcome measures to the condition, a disconnect between the way that children were performing in the clinic and the way that they were able to perform at home. Some concerns about the appropriateness of what was being measured. You know, in Duchenne, we had the 6-minute walk, and my son didn't really care too much about exercise, cared about functional walking. Some similar concerns about some of the tasks that may not be necessarily age appropriate, maybe developmentally appropriate for children with Angelman, but may not be age appropriate for children with Angelman. So as we started hearing some of these same things, we thought, okay, maybe we could apply what we've done in Duchenne to Angelman and see if it would work to take a look at how children are performing. So we're looking at 4 different domains that are each accompanied by a research question that caregivers wanted us to be able to answer to determine whether something was working or not. So communication, gross motor, assistance required for activities of daily living, and what we're calling receptivity to external direction. So are they teachable? Can they do something when you direct them to do something? And then we started structuring each domain. This is an example of the communication domain. There are 5 different tasks in communication, so we put families in different situations designed to elicit the highest level of performance within each criteria. And then the next step that we took was a feasibility study, because you think you're going to see something on video, and then you actually see something entirely different when you start piloting it with families. So we piloted our procedures in a group of 12 families that we're eternally grateful to because we learned a ton from that study. And from there, we solidified our task list, our capture instructions, and started working on the scorecards that we were going to use to quantify.
So earlier phases. So earlier phases of the development process focused on the task list and capture procedures. Scorecard development is where we developed and refined what we wanted to evaluate and how we wanted to quantify them. In order to do this, we conducted the ASVA source material study, which was an observational study to collect the source data that we needed to develop and validate our scorecards. In order to identify the initial scoring criteria, we asked Angelman syndrome experts, as well as researchers specializing in outcome measure development, to independently review videos from the feasibility and source material study, and to brainstorm potential criteria. We then hosted workshops for each domain to reach consensus on what should be scored. After that, it was time to draft the initial scorecards. To do this, we reviewed feasibility and source material study videos again, this time focusing on identifying functional levels varying in ranges of severity within the criteria that we identified earlier. We then drafted the criteria and levels into scorecards and asked our experts to review and provide feedback on the scorecards before we headed into our 2-round modified Delphi process. The objective of the 2-round modified Delphi process was to reach consensus on clarity and comprehensiveness of our scorecards, as well as to evaluate whether the criteria and levels represented change meaningful to caregivers and clinicians of those with Angelman syndrome, and whether those changes were worth an equal amount of points. The panelists that we used for the communication, activities of daily living, and external directions domain were caregivers and clinicians of Angelman syndrome. And we also use physical therapists for the gross motor domain. We had 2 rounds, the first consisting of a structured questionnaire about the scorecards, which also informed revisions to wording to improve clarity, or when 70% of the group spontaneously proposed the same change. And then in round 2, we hosted workshops to vote on discussion points such as revisions and weighting, and reached a minimum of 80% agreement in communication, ADLs, and external directions, and 100% agreement in gross motor domains. Now that we developed our scorecards, it was time to put them to the test. To do this, we trained 10 physical therapists, 5 with Angelman expertise, 5 without, as well as 10 speech-language pathologists and 10 occupational therapists on the use of our scorecards. Training entailed individual review of recorded training on how to use our scorecards, which walked them through the criterion and levels for the domain of their specialty. Then we asked them to attend or watch a recorded session of a live Q&A session. We then tested their ability to apply the scorecards to videos from earlier stages of development. In order to be considered certified in the use of the ASVA scorecards, they had to reach a minimum of 80% on each scorecard, and they had 3 tries to do so. Mindy will go over the scorecards in the next slide.
Okay. So we don't have time to do all of them, but I'll give you just an example of how they work in the communication domain. So this is a generous family that's allowing us to use the video from our original feasibility study. This is a task asking families to demonstrate how their child typically says yes to an object that they would like. We ask the families to first ask the question verbally, and then if they don't get a response, they can provide visual cues in addition. So this video takes off after that verbal question has been asked, and they're providing a visual cue.
Saying yes to something, you just accept it.
Guess what? The waiter doesn't need to know your name.
Okay, so you can see that his method of saying yes to something is to just simply accept it. And so the criteria that we're looking at in communication is, first of all, the predominant modality of expressive communication. And this doesn't list all of them. It's too long a scorecard to fit on a slide. But what you can see is that he scores at the reactive level. So he's just accepting something, turning away from something. One level of improvement from there would be the development of conventional gestures. So if he developed the ability to shake his head no, to nod yes, that would show up as improvement in our quantification system. In terms of complexity of verbal communication, he has none. If he were to develop the ability to babble, that would register as improvement in the scale. Similar with complexity of nonverbal communication, he has no nonverbal communication. If he were to develop 1 to 3 words, like, again, shaking head no, nodding yes, that would be 1 word, that would register as improvement. With receptive understanding, he requires visual cues. So he doesn't respond to just the verbal questions. So if he gained that ability, that would register as improvement. He does have typical eye contact with the caregiver, and they felt that the caregivers felt that was important. In terms of reciprocation and initiation, That isn't something that's really maximized on this particular task, but within this task, it's a limited caregiver exchange. So caregiver asks a question, person with Angelman responds. If they actually initiated communication, that would register as improvement. And then lastly, clarity of expression. Even the rater can tell what this person with Angelman's intent is in terms of accepting the Twinkie. So that rates as clarity that's observable by the rater. So that results in about 64% severity on our score. And then this is an example of another family that participated.
Emma, do you want some bar?
Okay, so he's asking the question verbally, so you can see her predominant modality of expressive communication is manual signing. Rubbing her belly, that's her family's sign for please. So she's using predominant, so spoken language would be improvement for her. She has no verbal communication beyond noises of pleasure or displeasure. She has on this video one word with the manual signing. We do add them up across all communication videos because 4 or more words would be 1 level up. She's at 1 word on this video. She demonstrates understanding of the verbal question. She has typical eye contact, caregiver limited exchange. So you can see there's a visceral difference between these 2 participants in our study in terms of the ease of communication that's experienced by their families. But we can quantify that visceral difference. So 44% severity as opposed to 64% severity. We're trying to meet each family where they're at and give them room to demonstrate improvement with an efficacious treatment. So anytime you're trying to slice things this finely and introduce some things that require some judgment, you worry a little bit that you're going to sacrifice on reliability. So like Kriszha mentioned, we trained 10 therapists in each discipline. 5 of them had Angelman expertise. 5 of them did not, because we wanted to see what kind of qualifications we needed to utilize for our raters. And we took a look at their level of agreement. And these are the figures for our inter-rater reliability. Sorry, this is intra. How do I go back one? Did I skip one? Okay, this is intra-rater. So this is when the same raters came back 4 months later and rated the same videos again. And so the closer you get to 1.0, the better it is. And so when we saw ICCs, in the 0.9 and higher range, that's when we got really excited. Because when you're trying to do this really rigorously and really sensitively, like again, you worry that you're going to sacrifice some reliability. And we saw quite high agreement amongst our raters on the way that they were scoring each video. And this is our inter-rater, so whether they agreed with one another. And again, really high inter-rater reliability. So that demonstrates that our raters agreed with one another, which really was our first step towards feeling like, okay, this is something that's going to be a rigorous way to quantify how people are performing in the home environment on everyday skills like communication. So just to summarize, we do still feel like there is an unmet need, as many people have spoken about, for a sensitive and reliable outcome in Angelman syndrome. And these are the things that we've accomplished so far. We've put together our task list, we've validated our capture procedures, we've built a custom video application that collects the video from home, designed and validated scorecards. We have a quality monitoring portal that our monitors use to watch the videos. We have a rater training program and a dashboard that the raters use. And our next steps are to basically demonstrate, are we measuring what we say we're going to measure? So we have some clinicians, several are in the room, Wenhan and Anjali, that we're grateful to, who are stratifying our videos into levels of severity that we're going to see if they line up with the scores on our scorecards. So that'll be our next test. And then we'll take a look at how much each child varies over a short term in the way that they perform those activities. So those will be our next steps. And lastly, just to summarize, what we're really hoping to accomplish here is to make sure that really beautiful girls like this don't suffer the same fate that my family's had to suffer, which is really sacrifice of literal blood, flesh, and tears in clinical trial participation without gaining the answers that you need at the end of the day, because that's really the biggest tragedy. When you participate in a trial, you find out that something doesn't work definitively. That's worth the investment of the time and effort and contribution to the community. But when you walk away without those definitive answers, that's the situation that we need to fix, and that's what we're hoping to address. Have a lot of people to be grateful to. Ionis for taking a leap of faith on what we were putting together, lots and lots of advocacy groups, and lots of academics that have helped us along the way, and Wenhan and Anjali at BCH and their whole team. And then lastly, the families that have participated in this video capture. Believe me, I understand that there's a lot of burden that families in our world of rare disease face, and we're extremely grateful to you for taking the time to collect these videos at home and allow us to develop this outcome. Thanks very much.